The letter that started the war was, of course, beige. Not just any beige. This was a special, soul-crushing shade of beige, the kind that architects choose for buildings where dreams go to die. It was the color of weak tea, of unseasoned chicken, of a life lived without ever coloring outside the lines. It arrived in my mailbox, nestled between a coupon for 20% off at a new artisanal dog biscuit bakery and a credit card offer printed in a font so aggressive it could have been a declaration of war on its own. The envelope was crisp, the Prestwick Meadows HOA logo embossed in a slightly darker, even more offensive shade of beige. I sighed, grabbing the mail and my lukewarm coffee before retreating to the safety of my home office. From my second-story window, I had a perfect view of my domain. A quarter-acre of meticulously, but not too meticulously, mowed lawn. A small vegetable garden that was currently losing a valiant battle against a family of rabbits. And, sitting proudly atop the highest peak of my roof, a magnificent, verdigris-coated rooster. He wasn't just any rooster weather vane, he was the rooster weather vane. My grandfather, a man who swore he could smell a thunderstorm 2 counties away, and who believed the best way to solve any problem was with either duct tape or a good fish fry, had salvaged it from a collapsing barn in the 70s. He'd spent a month restoring it, polishing the brass directionals and painstakingly rehammering the rooster's proud, slightly lopsided comb. "That rooster knows which way the wind is blowing, Leo," he'd told me on a fishing trip when I was 10. The smell of lake water and cheap beer thick in the air. More than you can say for most politicians. When Gramps passed, the rooster was the one thing I wanted. 2 weeks ago, after 3 different YouTube tutorials and 1 very close call with a ladder, I'd finally installed him. He was glorious. He was a proud, defiant king surveying his kingdom of identical HOA-approved taupe houses. He was a little piece of my grandfather watching over me. And now, he was the subject of a beige letter. I slit the envelope open with a letter opener I hadn't used in years. The paper inside was thick, expensive. The HOA spared no expense when it came to delivering bad news. Prestwick Meadows Homeowners Association. Preserving property values through proud uniformity. Official notice of violation. Date, September 18th. 2025. To Leo Maxwell, 1247. Sycamore Lane. From the Architectural Review Committee, ARC. Dear Mr. Maxwell, this letter serves as official notification that your property at 1247 Sycamore Lane has been found to be in violation of the Prestwick Meadows covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC and Rs. Violation, Unapproved rooftop appurtenance, Code 7, Section B, Paragraph 4, Avian-themed meteorological devices. Details. A recent community inspection identified a non-compliant structure, specifically a weather vane in the shape of a rooster, affixed to your roof. The ARC has no record of an approved application for this modification. Action required. Please remove the unapproved appurtenance within 14 calendar days of the date of this notice. Failure to comply will result in a fine of $50 per day until the violation is rectified. We appreciate your cooperation in maintaining the aesthetic integrity of our community. Sincerely, the Prestwick Meadows RC, avian-themed meteorological devices. They made my grandfather's rooster sound like a weapon of mass destruction. I read it again, the words swimming in a sea of bureaucratic rage. Appurtenance. Rectified. Aesthetic integrity. It was a language designed to make you feel small and powerless, to make you roll over and comply just to avoid the headache. But they had picked the wrong guy, and the wrong rooster. I walked over to my bookshelf and pulled out the Prestwick Meadows Bible. It was a 3-inch thick, white binder given to every new homeowner. The thud it made on my coffee table could have registered on the Richter scale. I'd skimmed it when I moved in, noting the truly insane rules. Trash cans could not be visible from the street for more than 4 hours before and after pickup. Holiday decorations had a strict 30-day display window. Front door colors had to be chosen from an approved palette of 6 shades of brown. I flipped to Code 7, Section B, and there it was, nestled between rules about solar panels and chimney caps. Paragraph 4. All rooftop meteorological devices, including but not limited to weather vanes, must be of a neutral, non-representational design. Designs depicting animals, mythical creatures, or commercial logos are strictly prohibited. It was real. Someone, at some point, had sat down and typed out a rule specifically to prevent joy, to prevent roosters. My defiance hardened into a diamond. They weren't just attacking a piece of metal on my roof. They were attacking my grandfather's memory. They were attacking the very idea that a man's home was his castle, even if his castle had a slightly rusty chicken on it. I wasn't going to remove the rooster. I was going to have a conversation. I looked at the letter, then up at my rooster glinting in the afternoon sun. "Okay, Gramps," I muttered to myself. "Let's see which way the wind is really blowing." The Prestwick Meadows clubhouse was a monument to taupe. It smelled faintly of lemon-scented industrial cleaner and quiet desperation. The walls were adorned with framed stock photos of smiling, ethnically diverse families who definitely did not live in our neighborhood, and the chairs were the kind of hard, plastic, stackable units designed for maximum discomfort. This was the seat of power, the heart of the Beige Empire. I arrived for the monthly HOA meeting 10 minutes early, clutching a folder with a printed photo of my rooster and a heavily highlighted copy of the bylaws. I was ready for a reasonable discussion. I was, in retrospect, an idiot. The board sat at a long folding table at the front of the room. In the center was the Queen herself, Carol Miller, HOA president. She was a woman in her late 50s, dressed in a navy blue power pantsuit with a terrifyingly sharp shoulder-to-hip ratio. A laminated name tag reading Carol, President, was pinned to her lapel like a military decoration. Her hair was a helmet of blonde spray, and her smile was a thin, bloodless line that didn't come close to reaching her eyes. Next to her, a binder the size of a car engine sat closed, radiating pure, uncut authority. To her right was Gerald, the treasurer. Gerald was a nervous, sweating man who looked like he'd accidentally wandered in from a different, much more stressful meeting. He adjusted his glasses every 12 seconds and periodically dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief. He was the quintessential sidekick, the loyal vizier to Carol's beige-tastic sultan. About a dozen other residents were scattered around the room, their expressions ranging from bored to terrified. No one made eye contact. This was not a meeting of neighbors. It was a parole hearing. Carol called the meeting to order with a rap of her gavel that was far too aggressive for the setting. After a mind-numbing 20 minutes discussing the new mulch being used around the community pool, she finally arrived at new business. "Next on the agenda," she said, her voice a weaponized form of condescension, "is the property at 1247 Sycamore Lane. Mr. Maxwell, I presume?" She looked directly at me. I stood up. "That's me. Hi, everyone. Leo Maxwell." "Mr. Maxwell," Carol began, her voice dripping with faux sweetness, "we're here to discuss Violation Notice 881B, the Unapproved Rooster." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The word rooster seemed to hang in the air like a profanity. "Right. That's what I wanted to talk about," I said, trying to sound as friendly and non-confrontational as possible. I opened my folder. "See, the thing is, this weather vane has a lot of sentimental value, It belonged to my grandfather. It's a genuine antique, a piece of Americana, really. I've included a photo. I tried to hand the photo to Gerald, but Carol intercepted it with the speed of a cobra. She glanced at it for half a second before setting it face down on the table, a clear dismissal. "That's very touching, Leo," she said, and the way she used my first name felt like an insult. However, sentiment does not supersede the CC and Rs. The rules are quite clear. Code 7, Section B, Paragraph 4. She didn't even have to look it up. She knew the scripture by heart. "I understand the rules," I pressed on, "but surely there's room for a little common sense. It's not hurting anyone. It doesn't affect property values. If anything, it adds character." Carol actually let out a small, dry laugh. "Character, Leo, is what we strive to control. Our bylaws are the product of decades of careful planning to ensure a harmonious and uniform aesthetic. That's what protects our property values. If we allow a rooster, what's next? A pig? A dragon? A giant inflatable flamingo? It's a slippery slope to aesthetic chaos." "I'm not asking for a flamingo, Carol," I said, my patience starting to fray. "I'm asking for a variance for a single, tasteful, historically significant rooster." "The committee does not grant variances for taste," she said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on her binder. "We grant variances based on hardship or necessity. Your desire to display a piece of folk art, however tasteful you may find it, does not constitute a hardship." Gerald, sensing the tension, decided to pipe up. "The rules are for everyone's benefit, Mr. Maxwell," he squeaked, sweating profusely. "A rising tide lifts all boats, and uniformity is our tide." I stared at him. "Did you just compare conformity to a natural disaster, Gerald?" He blinked, confused, and shrank back under Carol's withering glare. The room was dead silent. I could feel the eyes of the other residents on me. They were a captive audience to my public execution. I saw a flicker of sympathy in the eyes of a woman in the back row, but she quickly looked away when Carol's gaze swept the room. They were too afraid to speak up. I was losing. I was trying to fight a tank with a water pistol. Reason, emotion, common sense, none of it mattered. The binder was all that mattered. I felt a surge of frustration, a desire to just flip the table and storm out. But then, a different idea began to form, an idea born of pure, unadulterated spite. I took a deep breath and changed my tactics. "Okay," I said, my voice now calm and measured. "Okay, I understand. I just want to be compliant. So to be perfectly clear, representational art is the problem, not the device itself." Carol looked suspicious. "That is the essence of the rule, yes. So if I wanted to have a meteorological device on my roof, what is allowed?" I asked, my tone one of genuine, earnest inquiry. This was a question she wasn't expecting. It wasn't a plea or an argument. It was a request for clarification. It forced her to engage with the rules on my terms. She was momentarily flustered. She actually had to open the binder. Gerald leaned in, squinting at the page as if the text were written in ancient runes. She ran her finger down a page. "Well," she said slowly, "antennas and satellite dishes are permitted, provided they adhere to the size regulations in Appendix C, and—" she paused, squinting at a different paragraph. "And scientific or meteorological equipment for data collection is permissible, pending Architectural Review Committee approval." She looked up at me, a smug smile returning to her face, as if she'd just proven her point, but she hadn't. She had just handed me the keys to the kingdom. Scientific or meteorological equipment for data collection. A light didn't just go off in my head. A full-blown supernova erupted. The gears of malicious compliance started grinding, spitting sparks of glorious, beautiful revenge. The entire plan downloaded into my brain in a matter of seconds. It was audacious. It was expensive. It was going to be the single most infuriatingly compliant act this neighborhood had ever seen. I smiled, a genuine, wide, beatific smile. "Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Gerald," I said, my voice filled with a newfound warmth. "You've been incredibly helpful. You've given me a very clear path forward. I'll be sure to get that rooster down within the 14-day window." Carol was completely thrown off balance. My sudden and complete surrender was not in her script. She eyed me with deep suspicion, but I held my pleasant expression. I gathered my things, gave a cheerful nod to the rest of the room, and walked out of the clubhouse. The cool night air felt electric. They thought they had won. They thought they had crushed my little rebellion under the weight of their beige bureaucracy. They had no idea. They hadn't won a battle. They had just approved the funding for a space program. My weekend was a blur of caffeine and righteous fury. While the rest of Prestwick Meadows was power-washing their driveways and fertilizing their identical patches of fescue, I was assembling my war room. My spare bedroom, once a sad graveyard for old computer parts, became the command center for Operation Overkill. My first move was to become a reluctant expert in HOA law. I didn't just read the bylaws. I cross-referenced them. I analyzed their linguistic structure. I treated them like a sacred text I was attempting to debunk. I dove into online forums, discovering a vibrant subculture of people who had fought, and occasionally won battles against their own tyrannical HOAs. These were my people. I learned about selective enforcement, about the legal definitions of structure versus equipment, and about the magic words pending Architectural Review Committee approval. The bylaws were my enemy, but they were also going to be my weapon. Carol had given me the opening: scientific or meteorological equipment for data collection. She thought she was talking about a simple rain gauge. I was thinking bigger. Much, much bigger. My browser history from that weekend would have looked like the manifesto of a very specific type of madman. Professional-grade weather station for home use. Tallest consumer-grade anemometer mast. HOA-compliant satellite dish size regulations, Appendix C. How to sound like a real meteorologist. Legal definition of appurtenance versus antenna. Vortex Dominator 9000 Pro-Weather Array Reviews. That last one was the jackpot. The Vortex Dominator 9000 wasn't some cheap plastic thing you'd get at a hardware store. This was the real deal. It was a prosumer-grade system designed for weather hobbyists, storm chasers, and people with a serious grudge. It had a towering 10-foot mast, a sonic anemometer that looked like a futuristic crown, a wind vane that was sleek, black, and aggressively non-rooster-shaped, and a sensor suite the size of a microwave oven that measured everything from barometric pressure to UV radiation to particulate matter. It was, in short, the most obnoxiously impressive piece of scientific equipment I could legally mount on my roof. It was perfect. Now for the masterstroke. The application. I wasn't just going to ask for permission. I was going to bury them in a blizzard of bureaucratic excellence. I downloaded the official Architectural Modification Request form, a document so convoluted it was clear it was designed to make people give up. I filled it out with the precision of a surgeon. Project title: Prestwick Meadows Residential Meteorological Data Collection Initiative, Unit 1. Project description: installation of a state-of-the-art meteorological sensor array for the purpose of collecting hyper-local, real-time atmospheric data. This initiative aims to provide valuable environmental insights for the community, potentially improving irrigation efficiency, storm preparedness, and air quality monitoring. I didn't just include the spec sheet for the Vortex Dominator 9000. I printed out the full 48-page installation and operation manual. I included high-resolution diagrams of the mast assembly. I wrote a 2-page statement of purpose, filled with jargon I'd gleaned from NOAA's website. I talked about Doppler effect wind profiling and barometric trend analysis. I even created a chart projecting the community benefits with metrics like increased severe weather warning lead time and optimized lawn watering schedules. It was a symphony of professional-sounding bull. The final packet was over 50 pages thick. It was heavy. It felt important. It was a masterpiece of paper-based psychological warfare. I put it all in a crisp manila folder, walked to the community clubhouse, and found the mail slot labeled ARC Submissions. I paused for a moment, savoring the feeling. This was the Trojan horse. They were so focused on the rooster on the outside that they were about to willingly invite this monster inside. I slid the thick packet into the slot. It landed with a satisfying, definitive thump. The war had begun. And I had just launched the nerdiest, most well-documented first strike in the history of suburban warfare. A week later, a curt email landed in my inbox. Dear Mr. Maxwell, your application for the Residential Meteorological Data Collection Initiative has been reviewed and approved. Please ensure all work complies with local building codes. Sincerely, the ARC. I had to read it 3 times to believe it. They'd approved it. The sheer weight of my application had crushed their will to resist. I imagined Carol and Gerald flipping through the 50 pages, their eyes glazing over at the technical diagrams and jargon, before shrugging and stamping approved just to make it go away. It was a classic bureaucratic blunder. When faced with something that looks overwhelmingly official, assume it is. Their hubris was my greatest ally. Now I needed a crew. I wasn't about to climb up on that roof again myself. This job required professionals. Professionals who ideally shared my disdain for petty tyrants. The first contractor I called was a disaster. He was a slick guy named Chad from Sky High Tech Installs who showed up in a branded polo shirt and tried to upsell me on a 5-year cloud data subscription service. He looked at my house and talked about leveraging my vertical assets. I thanked him for his time and threw his business card in the recycling bin before his car had even left the curb. The second guy was a kid who couldn't have been older than 20. He looked at the spec sheet for the Vortex Dominator 9000, then at my roof, then back at the spec sheet. Dude, he said, his eyes wide, are you, with the government? I told him I wasn't, and he suddenly seemed a lot less interested. Then came the third quote. A slightly battered-looking white van pulled up with Dave and Mike's Electric and Installation painted on the side in a font that was simple and confident. 2 men hopped out. The first was Dave. Dave was in his late 50s, with a grizzled beard, a faded band t-shirt, and the kind of weary, cynical eyes that told you he'd seen every stupid thing a homeowner could possibly do. He moved with a slow, deliberate economy of motion, as if he was conserving energy for an impending apocalypse. The second was Mike. Mike was in his mid-20s, wiry and energetic, with a bright, curious expression. He was wearing a clean work shirt and carrying a tablet. He was the tech, the future. Dave was the wisdom, the past. I led them into my living room and laid the blueprints for the Vortex Dominator on the coffee table. All right, I said, deciding to just lay my cards on the table. Here's the situation. My HOA is run by a committee of wannabe dictators. They told me I had to take down my grandfather's old weather vane. Dave grunted. Sounds about right. What'd they object to? Color? Size? The shape, I said. It was a rooster. Dave stopped and looked at me. A slow grin spread across his face, cracking the cynical facade. A rooster? Seriously? As a heart attack, I confirmed. So I found a loophole in the bylaws. I'm allowed to install scientific or meteorological equipment for data collection. So I got this approved. I gestured to the spec sheet. Mike leaned in, his eyes lighting up. Whoa, is that the Vortex Dominator 9000? With the sonic anemometer? Dude, I've only seen these online. The refresh rate on the wind data is insane. Dave, however, was still stuck on the premise. He looked from the spec sheet to me, a newfound respect dawning in his eyes. So, let me get this straight, he said, the grin widening. The HOA said no to a little chicken on a stick, so you're having us install something that looks like it belongs on a NORAD base? It's for science, Dave, I said with a completely straight face. Community-enhancing science? Dave let out a short, sharp laugh. Kid, I like you. I like you a lot. He picked up the spec sheet for the mast. 10-foot mast, huh? We're gonna need the heavy-duty mounting brackets for this, for, wind shear. Wouldn't want it coming loose in a storm. He winked. Mike was already swiping through photos of my roof on his tablet. The pitch is good, plenty of clearance from that big oak tree. We can run the conduit down the north side. It'll be less visible. No, Dave interrupted, walking to the window and looking out. Let's run it down the west side. It's a cleaner run to the breaker box. He glanced across the street, in the direction of a particularly beige house. Also happens to be the side that faces the street. And that house over there. We gotta make sure the installation is visible, for inspection purposes. I had found my guys. We spent the next hour walking the property. They were the perfect team. Mike would talk about grounding rods and data cable shielding, while Dave would talk about the best way to anchor the mast so it would survive a Category 3 hurricane, all while making dry, sarcastic comments about the neighborhood's oppressive tidiness. Dave said, squinting up at my roof, if we mount it right on the peak, it'll get the cleanest airflow. Also adds another 3 feet of height. For accuracy? Accuracy is very important to me, I agreed solemnly. We shook on it. Their quote was fair, and it included a line item for premium spite-based installation services that Dave had added in pencil. When I signed the contract, Dave clapped me on the shoulder. Don't you worry, Leo, he said. When we're done, your house is going to be the most scientifically advanced, data-collecting, HOA-infuriating property on this entire block. It's going to be a work of art. I couldn't wait. Installation day dawned bright and clear. A perfect day for chaos. At precisely 8 a.m., Dave and Mike's van rumbled down Sycamore Lane. In a world of silent Priuses and electric SUVs, the sound of a diesel engine was like a thunderclap. The van parked in front of my house, and the side door slid open with a screech, disgorging a mountain of ladders, metal poles, toolboxes, and spools of thick black wire onto my driveway. It was a beautiful, disruptive mess. Within minutes, curtains began to twitch across the street. The quiet hum of Prestwick Meadows had been broken. Dave and Mike worked with an efficient, practiced rhythm. Ladders were up against the house in moments. Mike scrambled onto the roof with the agility of a squirrel, while Dave started methodically laying out the components of the mast on my lawn, like a general preparing for battle. The sound of a drill biting into wood echoed through the morning air. It took exactly 11 minutes for Carol to appear. She didn't storm over. She glided, her power pantsuit a navy blue harbinger of doom. She moved with the unnatural serenity of a predator closing in on its prey. She stopped on the sidewalk, arms crossed, her expression a tight mask of outrage. "Leo!" she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "What is the meaning of this?" I had been waiting for this moment. I ambled out my front door, holding a mug of coffee in one hand and a neatly folded piece of paper in the other. "Morning, Carol," I said cheerfully. "Beautiful day for some science, isn't it?" "What is that thing on your roof?" she demanded, pointing a trembling finger at Mike, who was bolting the first mounting bracket to the ridge line. "That, Carol, is the Prestwick Meadows Residential Meteorological Data Collection Initiative, Unit 1, I said, savoring every syllable. I unfolded the paper and held it out to her. "Approved and signed by the ARC. Here's a copy for your records." She snatched the paper from my hand. Her eyes scanned the document, her face going through a fascinating series of colors. Pale white, then blotchy red, then a deep, furious crimson. The signature at the bottom was clear as day. She was trapped. She had approved her own nightmare. This is not what we envisioned," she sputtered, waving the paper. "Really?" I feigned surprise. "It's all in the 50-page proposal, the mast height, the sensor array dimensions, everything. I believe in full transparency." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She had no recourse. She had been out-bureaucrated. Defeated, she spun on her heel and marched back to her beige fortress. But I knew this was just the first skirmish. For the rest of the day, she was a ghost at her window, her phone held up, no doubt documenting every perceived infraction for a future legal battle. The mast went up around noon. It was glorious. 10 feet of gleaming aluminum anchored securely to the peak of my roof, towering over everything. It was a middle finger to conformity. Then came the components. Mike, geeking out, carefully mounted the sonic anemometer. Dave attached the sleek black wind vane. Finally, they hoisted the main sensor suite into place and began running the thick conduit down the side of the house, the very visible west side. At 2:15 p.m., the inevitable happened. A police cruiser pulled up silently to the curb. Carol had escalated. 2 officers got out. One was young and looked like he was barely out of the academy. The other was an older sergeant with a magnificent mustache and the profoundly weary eyes of a man who had seen the absolute dumbest things humanity had to offer, probably on a daily basis. I walked down the driveway to meet them, my heart beating a little faster. This was the big leagues now. "Afternoon, officers," I said calmly. "Something I can help you with?" The sergeant sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "Sir, we got a call about unauthorized construction and a possible illegal broadcast tower." He looked up at my roof, at the nearly complete weather station, and his expression was a perfect blend of confusion and annoyance. Before I could answer, Carol came marching back across her lawn, her phone held out like evidence. "Officers, thank you for coming. This man is installing this monstrosity. It's an eyesore, it's a violation, and who knows what kind of signals it's broadcasting." I held up my hands placatingly. "Officers, my name is Leo Maxwell. This is a personal weather station. It's for a hobby. It doesn't broadcast anything. It just collects data and sends it to my computer through a shielded cable." Dave chose this moment to descend the ladder. He wiped his greasy hands on a rag. "It's all low voltage, officers," he said, his voice a gravelly baritone of authority. "Fully grounded, all components are FCC compliant for residential use. We pulled the necessary electrical permits this morning." He held out his phone with the digital permit displayed. The sergeant looked from Dave's phone to my face, then to Carol's sputtering rage. "Ma'am," the sergeant said, turning to Carol, his voice dangerously calm. "Does he have permission from the Homeowners Association to install this?" "Well, yes, technically," Carol conceded through gritted teeth. "But they misled us. We didn't know it would be so enormous." The sergeant's mustache twitched. He was trying not to smile. He turned back to me. "So you're telling me," he said slowly, "that she's mad because you put up a weather thingy you were allowed to put up?" "That's the long and short of it, officer," I said. "Her main objection originally was to poultry." The younger officer choked back a laugh. The sergeant shot him a look, but his own eyes were twinkling. "Ma'am," he said to Carol, his tone now official and dismissive. "This is a civil matter between you and your HOA. There are no laws being broken here. Please do not call 911 for issues like this again. Have a good day, gentlemen." He tipped his hat to us, and the two officers got back in their cruiser. As they pulled away, I could see both of them laughing. The victory was so sweet I could taste it. Carol stood on the sidewalk, utterly defeated, before retreating once more. An hour later, the job was done. Mike came down from the roof and gave me a thumbs up. "She's online, Leo. We are officially collecting data." I went inside to my office and pulled up the software. My screen lit up with a cascade of information. Wind speed, 8.7 miles per hour from the WSW. Barometric pressure, 1,014.5 HPA. Humidity, 56%. Temperature, 78.4 degrees Fahrenheit. It was magnificent. Dave, Mike, and I stood on my front lawn, admiring our handiwork. The Vortex Dominator 9000 stood tall against the blue sky, a gleaming monument to science, spite, and the beautiful art of malicious compliance. The next few weeks settled into a tense, cold war. The Vortex Dominator 9000 became a permanent fixture on the skyline of Sycamore Lane. I, in turn, became a minor local celebrity and a pariah, depending on who you asked. The kids in the neighborhood loved it, calling my house the space station. A few of the more tech-savvy dads would stop by while walking their dogs to ask about the wind speed. Carol, of course, was not amused. My mailbox was flooded with a new series of beige envelopes, this time for infractions so minor they were almost poetic in their pettiness. Violation. Your recycling bin was visible from the street for 11 minutes, longer than permitted post-pickup. Violation. A dandelion was observed blooming in your front lawn. Zone 2. Violation. Holiday lighting. One string of unapproved white LEDs around a window was not removed by the January 15th deadline. It was September. I hadn't even thought about Christmas lights yet. I ignored them. I was too busy with my new hobby. I created a simple, clean web page, prestwickmeadowsweather.com, that displayed all the data from my station in real time with slick, easy-to-read graphs. I posted a link to it on the neighborhood's official social media page. The post got a surprising number of likes and a few curious comments. Then, late on a Thursday afternoon, things got interesting. The local news was predicting a storm front moving in. The TV meteorologist, a man with impossibly white teeth and a tan that suggested he spent zero time outdoors, was cheerfully promising some scattered evening showers, maybe a rumble of thunder, nothing to cancel your barbecue plans over, folks. But my station was telling a very different story. I was watching the numbers on my screen, and I felt a pit forming in my stomach. It wasn't just rain. The barometric pressure was in an absolute freefall, dropping faster than I'd ever seen. On top of that, the Vortex Dominator's sophisticated sonic anemometer was picking up a specific rotating wind shear pattern in the upper-level winds. It wasn't a big, broad rotation like a supercell. It was small, tight, and directly over our area. It was the classic signature of a microburst or a spin-up tornado, a sudden, violent, localized downdraft that the big regional Doppler radar often missed until it was too late. The TV was predicting a light drizzle. My roof was predicting a fistfight with God. I didn't even think about it. I went straight to the neighborhood social media page and started typing. Subject: Urgent weather warning for Prestwick Meadows. Hey folks, Leo Maxwell here at 1247 Sycamore. I know the local news is saying light rain, but the data coming off my weather station is showing something potentially much more severe developing directly over our neighborhood in the next hour. We're seeing a dramatic pressure drop and wind shear patterns consistent with a possible microburst. I'm not a professional meteorologist, but I'm looking at the raw data and it's alarming. I'd strongly suggest bringing in any loose patio furniture, grills, trampolines, etc., and maybe parking your cars in the garage if they're out. Better safe than sorry. You can see the live data here, prestwickmeadowsweather.com. The response was immediate. A few people posted, "Thanks for the heads up, Leo," but it only took 3 minutes for the Queen to weigh in. Carol Miller's comment appeared, dripping with sanctimony. "With all due respect, I think we should trust the certified professionals on television, not the alarmist data from an uncertified and frankly unsightly piece of roof junk. Please, everyone, let's not engage in fear-mongering." The neighborhood was split. Some people started posting pictures of their patio furniture safely stowed away. Others posted laughing emojis under Carol's comment. The battle for public opinion was on. 20 minutes later, the sky went from a pleasant gray to a bruised, sickening shade of greenish black. The wind didn't pick up gradually. It hit like a physical blow. 1 second, the trees were swaying gently. The next, they were bent sideways, their leaves torn away in a horizontal torrent. The rain didn't start as a drizzle. It was a solid wall of water that slammed against my windows. Then came the roar. It wasn't the rumble of thunder. It was a constant, deafening sound, like a freight train was passing directly through my living room. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the house into a dim, gray twilight. My emergency backup power from my computer and modem kicked in with a reassuring hum. My screens were still on. On my website's data feed, the wind speed was topping 90 miles per hour. And then through the roar, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A deep, groaning crack, followed by a ground-shaking thump that vibrated through the floor. My station was my only eyes and ears. I was live updating on the neighborhood page using my phone's cellular data, posting screenshots of the wind speeds and the pressure charts. "Wind's peaking now. This is the worst of it. Stay in your basements if you have them. It's moving east quickly. Should be over in the next 10 minutes. My feed was now the only source of information. The power was out. The internet was down for everyone else. My unsightly roof junk had become the community's only lifeline. 10 minutes later, as quickly as it had arrived, the roar faded. The wind died down to a strong breeze. The deluge softened to a steady rain. It was over. The silence that followed was more unnerving than the storm itself. As the last of the rain subsided, I ventured outside. The world was drenched and disordered. Leaves and small branches littered every surface. A neighbor's trampoline was wrapped around their mailbox. But the real spectacle was at the end of the street. The massive 100-year-old oak tree on the community greenbelt. The very tree that a resident had formally requested the HOA trim back 2 months prior, a request Carol had denied because it was historic and majestic, had been sheared in half. A gargantuan limb, thick as a car, had crashed directly across the main entrance to the subdivision, completely blocking it. It lay exactly where my next-door neighbor, Tom, usually parked his brand-new pickup truck. Tom came out of his house, his face pale. He looked at the massive branch, then at his empty driveway, then at me. "Leo," he said, his voice shaky, I saw your post. I thought you were crazy, but my wife made me move the truck into the garage. Holy crap!" One by one, people emerged from their homes, blinking at the damage. The story spread like wildfire. The guy whose patio furniture was still on his patio now had a glass table in 1,000 pieces. The family with the trampoline was staring at its twisted metal frame. And everyone knew that Tom's truck would have been flattened if not for my warning. My social media post, once a source of debate, was now filled with 100 comments of, "Thank you, Leo," and "You were right." Carol Miller's condescending comment stood out like a sore thumb, a digital monument to her own arrogance. She was conspicuously absent from the post-storm debriefing happening on the street. A week later, an emergency HOA meeting was called. The clubhouse was packed. There wasn't a single empty seat. The atmosphere was nothing like the tense, quiet parole hearing I'd attended before. This time the air was electric. The residents weren't scared anymore. They were angry. Carol and Gerald sat at the front table, looking small and defensive. Carol tried to run the meeting with her usual iron fist, starting with some nonsense about the mulch budget, but the crowd wasn't having it. Tom stood up. "Carol, I don't want to talk about mulch," he said, his voice clear and strong. "I want to talk about that tree. I want to talk about how this board ignored a safety request and then tried to discredit the one person who gave us an accurate warning that saved, at the very least, my $50,000 truck." A chorus of agreement rose from the crowd. "Carol," a woman from the back chimed in, "while you were worried about the color of my mailbox, Leo's roof junk was the only thing that kept us informed when the power was out. I think we need a change in priorities." Carol tried to argue, to quote bylaws, to regain control, but the tide had turned. The people had found their voice. An elderly man I'd never seen speak before stood up and formally called for a vote of no confidence in Carol's leadership. It wasn't even close. Carol was voted out in a landslide. Gerald immediately resigned as treasurer, looking relieved to be free. Tom was nominated and voted in as the new HOA president right then and there. His first act was to publicly thank me. His second act was to propose a new amendment to the bylaws. "I'm calling it the Rooster Rule," he announced with a grin. "It will allow for one piece of non-conforming, historically significant decorative art per household, pending review for safety, not for taste." All in favor? Every single hand went up. Even mine. The following Saturday, I was back up on a ladder. I wasn't taking the Vortex Dominator 9,000 down. It had earned its place. It was a landmark now, our neighborhood's guardian. Instead, I was on a smaller ladder, next to my garden shed. I carefully mounted the old, verdigris-coated rooster on its roof. It was perfectly visible from my office window. It wasn't on the highest peak anymore, but it looked right at home among the tomato plants and the defiant rabbits. I finished the last bolt and climbed down. I stood back on my lawn, looking from the sleek scientific array on my main roof to the proud, lopsided rooster on the shed. My grandfather's memory and my own stubborn victory coexisting in perfect, hard-won harmony. The wind picked up, a gentle autumn breeze, and both vanes swung in unison, pointing west. The wind had shifted, and for the first time in a long time, everyone in Prestwick Meadows, even the rooster, knew exactly which way it was blowing.